Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, episode number, 87 now?
87.
87, we're getting up there, almost at 100.
Almost. Almost. Yeah, no, it'll be good. It doesn't feel like we've been doing it this long.
No, it's been like a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about JSPM and System.js, which seems to be something that the panel here is pretty stoked about, and something that Leon has been using too. I'll introduce him in a minute. So on the panel we have Danny Blue.
Hey everybody.
We have Leon Revill.
Hello, everyone.
I'm Eric Isaacson, and our guest today is Amal Hussein.
Hello.
You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing with System.js or JSPM?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a developer in the Boston area. I've been writing full stack JavaScript for a little while now, and about 8 months ago, a team that I was on adopted JSPM as our bundler, and System.js, kind of came along with that, and it was, our kind of first big project that, was going to be all in ES6, and so it really felt like the strategic, the tool to pick to be in line with standards, and so I got to do a deep dive there, and I just started a new project recently, and I'm on the beta version, and loving it as well. So yeah, that's my experience.
That's awesome. So, all right. So, I mean, the obligatory first question that always has to be, asked is, what is JSPM? We've said two things, and let's start with JSPM. What is JSPM?
You want to go first, Leon, or?
No, you go for it. You're the expert here.
All right. Well, if I had to give the tweetable version, JSPM is the package manager that works with System.js, which is really cool module loader, and it's a wrapper around the ES6 module loader, and so JSPM is a really cool tool for us to be able to bundle, but also if we don't want to bundle, to be able to load things dynamically, and I think once HTTP2 comes along, things will be a lot more mature in that regard. But it's in essence it's a bundler that's used with JSPM. I mean with System.js.
So how does JSPM compare to something like NPM?
Oh, okay. Well, NPM is, so JSPM, I would say a better analogy would be, how does JSPM compare to something like webpack? I think that those two things are more in the same category than, NPM, which is, NPM is NPM. And so JSPM will bundle all of your JavaScript as well as your CSS, and it'll allow you to load them in dynamically. And so with the newer version of JSPM, which is 0.17, there's some more Webpack-like features that have come natively, such as hot module loading and being able to bundle, while doing local development code. So there's a lot of really cool new features in the beta version that are pretty much, I think, at this point, fairly in line with Webpack. So,
is it fair to say then that you could use something like NPM as like the module loader, and then use Webpack to actually bundle everything up, but JSPM kind of has it all integrated into one kind of platform? Is that correct in saying that?
Yes, that's actually right. And the really cool thing about JSPM, let's step back with the stable version. You can choose. You can actually specify where you want to get your packages from, and so it's really useful for items which aren't on NPM. You can actually get them from GitHub.
Useful.
Yeah, and so you can actually specify, like, you can say React, GitHub, and so it's pretty cool. Like, if you want to get someone's branch, or if you want to fetch your fork, of React because you were angry at the contributors, you know, for not accepting your pull request, and you know, you can go ahead and fetch your fork. And the really cool thing about JSPM as well is it's kind of comes with shrink wrap for free, because all of your dependencies and their sub-dependencies are mapped and in a file called the system.config, and so they're kind of shrink wrapped for you, which is nice as well.
So you said shrink wrap there, and a couple, like you said, hot loaders, and I don't know if everybody knows what these things are. Can you kind of say what those are?
Yeah, sure. So shrink wrap is the way of literally kind of, as I say, figuratively shrink wrapping your dependency versions. And so let's say, you know, you have version 1 of Angular, and you know, you're not ready to automatically upgrade every time, you know, your team does an npm install. So you would shrink wrap so that all of your dependencies, as well as their dependencies, are recursively kind of frozen in the versions that you currently have. And so it's really useful because, as we all know, JavaScript is a very dynamic community, and you know, it's nice to be able to you know, only upgrade when you're doing it so intentionally.
So, okay, and I think this is where I know for a while I was pretty confused, and I think part of it is the name, that JSPM is JavaScript Package Manager, right? And I think that's where a lot of people start getting a little bit confused with the way that other package managers work. But for simplicity's sake, right now, JSPM is a way to go get your dependencies from wherever they may be.
Yes.
And it will also help you. It will also help you bundle them. So it's a little bit. So it does a couple of things. It doesn't just manage your dependencies. It will also help you bundle them together so that they are ready to load into the browser. And that's where this other part comes, which is System.js. So can you tell us a little bit about, like, again, brought your Twitter definition of what System.js is?
Sure.
And then we can talk about how those two things work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So System.js is kind of like, I would say at this point, the golden standard for dependency injection. That's really framework agnostic, or even context agnostic to some degree with the newer versions. But it just allows you to use ES6 and ES7 syntax to import your dependencies into your application. And whether that's with Angular or React or something else, it's agnostic to that.
It's
pretty awesome. Angular is using this by default, right?
Well, Angular is so. And this is one of the things that I know a lot of people, me originally, thought that System.js was part of Angular too, because that was one of the first times that I had seen it. But I just want to be careful about that. So, like, in their documentation, that's the one they use by default. They are also specific, very careful to say this is the module loader that we are using, and they even call it webpack and a couple other things. So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut in right there. I just know that was something that was confusing to me for a while, and so I just wanted that, you know, so a lot of, because Aurelia also uses it in their like their starter app documentation. But it is a module loader that, like Amal said, you can load in anything pretty much.
Literally anything, even globals.
My thought on that too is, like, I don't know if this is true, so if you guys could enlighten me on it. Like, my thought would be that JSPM is not necessarily, is like, you know, all of these things, and not like npm. You could do this with, you know, Babelify and browserify, or webpack and Babel plugin for that. You do these things together, but you have to have these separate installs, and maybe different versions don't work with that. So it's a lot more hassle. But I would think that you would get much more specificity in a system like that, rather than having it all together. Is that fair to say, or is that not fair to say?
I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's like the Angular 1 versus Angular 2 conversation. But you know, I think developers really like flexibility, right? And that's why Node is so much more popular than Rails, right? Less opinionated, lets you do what you want. And so let's step back a little bit. So JSPM right now, the stable version, which is, I think, 0.16, awesome. But 0.17 is kind of, it's almost like a different beast because it has so many more features. And one of them is that now JSPM actually allows you to load, which is kind of crazy. I'm still wrapping my head around this. It actually, you don't even need NPM. You don't even need a package JSON anymore. You know, you don't need to do NPM init because you can now have your node modules that are for your client and your server both managed by JSPM, which you could not do in 0.16. So that in itself, to me, is like a major win. And one of the other things I really also like about JSPM is, you know, for both versions right now is you know, there's no separate package file. Your JSPM dependencies get added to your package JSON, so you can see in one file for both your, if you're doing a isomorphic or universal JavaScript app, you can see where your dependencies are for both of these things, and you can see where the duplicates are. You can see all of it in one file, which is great. And then also there is a more extended file with more configuration options, you know, that you have as well. But the fact that everything is managed in just your package JSON is just fantastic. And now with the newer version, if I can manage my node modules, you know, for my node app and manage, you know, my client modules, I mean, to me, that I'm sold, right? That's one less thing I have to set up and manage as a developer.
Does it handle like modules, like if you want, if you don't, let's say you have front end assets and you don't want that, like your file that's compiled into ES5 code from your transpiler, you don't want that to have every module. Like, does it handle that pretty well, where it doesn't, anything's unused or not like called out explicitly?
Yeah, and so the way,
really well?
I think the reason why they've been able to kind of simplify our package JSON is because, again, it's using the magic of System.js to dynamically load in what you need when you need it, and with the right context, right? And so, so I believe that System.js kind of handles a lot of that. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
yeah, I think so. Thank you.
I'd be really interested to know a little bit more about kind of what this means when we start, you know, writing more things entirely in ES 2015 or ES Next. Kind of how is the System.js JSPM going to work with, you know, proper JavaScript modules, and how will that transition kind of happen?
Yeah, I mean, so I think if you look at the System.js website there, I mean, really good docs, first of all, both for JSPM and System.js, which you can use separately. They're following the standards fairly closely, and so I think that, you know, anything that follows the standard, to me, is that's a recipe for success. So.
Cool. Yeah, because so what I've been focused on a lot recently is trying to figure out the best way to build you know, entire applications using just ES 2015, using modules and using web components. And so I started building my web components, and I started actually using JSPM to distribute them because it looked like the perfect solution. But actually some of the new ones I've created, I've actually reverted just to using NPM, just because and at least at the moment, it seems like less friction for developers to come and use it because they've already got NPM installed. NPM seems to have this big push at the moment to start to be used more and more in the front end. Kind of, it sounds like the opposite to what JSPM's done. JSPM started at the front end and then is now moving to the server by the sound of it. Because everybody already has NPM installed, I've started to use that in some of our newer components. So could you kind of identify kind of why should we use JSPM over? I mean, I know it sounds like JSPM isn't exactly comparable to NPM, but obviously you can do just kind of a similar thing in this kind of instance. Could you kind of clear that up a little bit more, because it's a little bit confusing to me, that's for sure.
Yeah, sure. So I'll re-clarify one thing first, is that JSPM does not replace NPM, right? So NPM is its own thing. It's the place to go get your node modules, etc. What JSPM does replace is how you fetch and manage those inside of your application.
Right. So you can actually get NPM modules uh, using JSPM as well as like GitHub and other places like that. That's pretty cool. Okay.
Bower, GitHub, yeah, absolutely. And so even CDNs, which is kind of awesome, right? So you can do all of those things. But with NPM, I think for me the concept it's more matter of overhead at this point. I mean, there's nothing wrong with. I mean, I have that right now currently in my application just because I found out about the new universal JSPM a little later into when I started the scaffold for my project. But I will be. I filed the tech debt card and I will be moving, I think, everything to be managed by JSPM just because of the overhead factor. I think it's one less thing to worry about, one less thing to manage, and then the big win for me compared to Webpack is there's no new syntax. I mean, so JSPM, the creators were really smart in kind of following a successful model with NPM. So there was no funny syntax. Even when you're starting your project, you're doing a JSPM init. You have JS. You do a global install for JSPM, then you do a JSPM init. It walks you through creating your package.json just the same way you would for starting a new project with NPM. So that's another win.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, just clear that up.
Sorry. Okay.
Good. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I don't think there's. It sounds like there's. You could publish. Sorry. Blah 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 blah. You could publish to NPM, JSPM, and even Bower if you wanted to, and you could use all three and just see kind of how it works. I'm thinking I might actually do that. Not
performance
Bower probably,
testing.
But just to test it out and see how these things work, and also to make it more versatile. So if somebody's using JSPM, it's not, my package is not available in there. I can use the Git way to grab stuff like Bower does and NPM, but if this package isn't in there, some people may not know that, and want to make it easier for developers to just jump in. It's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So does I have one follow-up, and then I have a question about something you mentioned earlier. But so I think another thing to point out is that JSPM is not a repository, correct? So like NPM has its own repository that you publish to. JSPM isn't a repository. You don't publish something to JSPM and pull it down from there. JSPM is just how you go get it from different places, correct?
Ah.
Yes. I apologize if that wasn't clear from earlier. There's no, JSPM is a tool. It's not. It's not a place to store your stuff, right? So it's a tool to go fetch your things, but not how you, not where you store them, right? And there's no repository like Danny was saying.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So
Thank you. I didn't realize that even. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Maybe we should have slowed down earlier. I wasn't sure what the context was.
There's a lot.
Of everybody's foo. You don't know everyone's foo, and you have to kind of feel it out.
Yeah. No worries. There's a lot. There's a lot to cover here, and in general, and this is one of the reasons.
I have one more cool thing I want to share with you later, but I'll tell you that later. I'm so excited about this because I just got this to work with my new team.
No, if you're excited about it, go. No. What is it?
Should I just share it?
Yes.
Okay, so I just started a new company. I have to give my company a shout out because I am technically on company time in Bible, and it's a software as a service company. They do live auction software. They're pretty cool, partner with eBay and all this stuff. So anyways, I kind of came on board to help with a lot of legacy code, crafting, whatever, throwing out, making the thing new, all of that stuff, and so. So we have a few different products, and we're kind of going with the Martin Fowler approach of strangling our application, right? So we want to strangle our legacy application because we can't afford to just stop developing for 3 months to make a new thing. And so how do we do that? So we're kind of going with the approach of making a new page or making a new little piece of functionality and replacing it, and writing that in. Right now we're on a React Redux reactive stack, and now I can package up this little component that I made, and I can bring it into my legacy app, which one of them is it's a backbone app, and it uses require.js, and I can actually use require.js I bundled it with JSPM, and I published it to NPM. I downloaded it, and I'm able to now use it in Require.js. I'm able to use it in something that's like takes an AMD format, common JS format, and even ES6. And so that's super powerful that I was able to do that, and that's a feature in the new beta. And I think that a lot of teams can start leveraging that in order to to start kind of refactoring their legacy code in a strategic and modular way. So.
Yeah, that's very cool, because that's a big problem for a lot of companies when they've spent 5 years building an application. As we all know, JavaScript stuff changes so rapidly, and keeping up to date with it without, like you said, having to stop for 3 months and start again. So having a way to kind of modularizing that and doing it piece by piece, that is really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll link you guys. I'll put this in the show notes, I guess, the link to that specific thing, how to do that in
cool.
using JSPM, and also I'll link the Martin Prowler article as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the other thing that we've been talking about JSPM a lot, and I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically about the System.js part of it, because if we think of them as like two parts of the same thing, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the System.js part. So we've said the word modules a lot, and so and you mentioned how System.js is trying to stay close to the ES6 or ES 2015 module loader spec. So what is the difference between, when most people now think about ES6, ES 2015 modules, they think about import curly brace stuff. They think about the syntax that you use for declaring and exporting and importing modules. So what is the difference between that spec and then the module loader spec that System.js is trying to stay close to?
Yeah, I'll try to answer this question as best as I can, since I'm not as familiar with the spec details, but basically, we'll give a little history lesson. So, like a lot of other languages, Java included, right? Most languages have a way of handling modules and how to bring thing A with functionality A into thing B with functionality B. And with JavaScript, there was no defined way with the language, for us to do that. And so we use all this crufty stuff with patterns and using a self-executing functions and closures and all of this funky stuff to create common JS modules, AMD modules, etc. And previously, before that, it was globals, right? Put your script tag on the page and make sure the order is correct. And so, so now, the language has this new standard. They have, we have a way of loading, creating a module and also loading it into your page, and with that, even loading it dynamically. And so System.js is really just a wrapper around that functionality, and it allows us to bring that functionality into our non-ES5 code. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I think that's pretty much what I'm looking for. I just wanted to make sure that we clarified the difference between those two, because a lot of people have been using Babel or TypeScript or whatever, have been using that syntax for a long time, and so there is the syntax, and then there is the way that the browser actually loads the things using that syntax into the browser. And
yeah,
so I thought that.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So that's trying to get all. I'm doing very hard. I'm working very hard to get all the ums out of my talking, and so sometimes I just freeze up and stop talking altogether. But
ums are so fetch, so don't stop commenting.
No, that's good. So. And I feel like I'm talking. I feel like I'm talking a lot now because we're getting into some other stuff. Eric or Leon, do you have anything else that you wanted to jump in here with before we keep going forward?
No, this is good stuff. I'm fairly new to a lot of this.
Yeah, I'm already starting to get excited about really trying to look into JSPM a lot more and try and maybe backtrack my decision to use NPM for my web components. So this is exciting enough already.
Are you using Polymer or just straight up web components?
Native web components, yeah, that's what I've been playing mostly around with.
That's awesome. Yeah, you should try JSPM. I think that would then you're like super standards man.
But so that's something else is that you. I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but you don't have to use JSPM and System.js together. You can use one or the other. You can use just System.js. If anybody that's looked through the Angular 2 like a quick start guide, it uses System.js. It does not use JSPM. And then you can also use JSPM, and then you don't have to use System.js. And when I first found out what all JSPM did, I was a little bit. I don't know if taken aback is exactly the right thing, but yeah, but I had no idea. I did have that moment where I was like, "You're telling me it is that easy to bundle all of my stuff together?"
Yeah, and doing the transpiling as well. That's what I found was really cool when I was playing around with it. You didn't have to install all this extra stuff. It just asked you what do you want to transpile with, Babel or whatever. Off you go. It was brilliant.
It's kind of like it almost feels like Rails is back, for JavaScript. It's almost like this cool way of just creating a generator, like start my app, get my things, let's go, let me create my hello world. I mean, how many of you guys have looked at beta?
I have not looked at the beta at all.
Please look at beta because your mind will be extra blown. And I was so shy. I stumbled into it by accident because I was trying to do this thing. Like I said, I was like, hey, I want to bundle this and I want to put it into my required, legacy of required JS, and that's AMD, and I need to bundle this in a way that it's going to work in that context. And after searching and stumbling, and I was like, hey, let me look at beta, and boom, there it was, and my solution was well documented, and there was actually a feature to do exactly what I wanted to do. So that was really great, and also a shout out to the people who contributed to the documentation. It's one of the best documentation guides I think I've seen for JavaScript anyway.
That's great. We should talk about transpiling a little bit, because which of these two systems is the part that actually does the transpiling for you? Is it System.js when it's loading the modules in, or is it JSPM when it's putting your packages together? At what point does your stuff actually... So TypeScript, for example. So for anybody that doesn't know, if you go into your console and you say JSPM init, it asks you a few questions, and one of them is, do you want to use a transpiler? And I think it defaults to Babel right now. I think it used to default to Tracer. Now it defaults to Babel, and then you can pick Babel, Tracer, or TypeScript. So which of those steps is the thing that's actually transpiling your code? Is it transpiling it live in the browser, like as it's importing the modules, or does it do it in a more traditional compile step of what we're used to now?
Yeah, I believe it's in a compile step, and you can pick, your tool, Babel, Tracer, and or none, which is actually what I have from an, with the non-beta, we had our own transpile tasks and whatnot, but we opted not to use the inline one. I didn't think it was optimal, but I think they've done a lot of improvements to get speed up, etc. But does that answer your question?
A little bit. What I'm trying to figure out is if it transpiles in the browser or before it gets to the browser. So, for example, what I do now is right now I have a TypeScript task, and I compile my TypeScript into a dist folder, and then I use System.js to. I'm also not using JSPM, so this is just using TypeScript with System.js. So I just transpile things into a dist folder, and then I load my modules out of that dist folder. If you are doing... Sorry, go ahead.
No, it transpiles it before it gets to the browser.
So it is before it gets to the browser, not in the browser.
I think it can actually do both, because I remember when I was playing around with it, there's like a... so it's like when you're developing and building out your modules and things, you can actually, like you would with Browser Sync or something, load it into the browser, and then it'll use as... I think maybe it's only available with Babel, because you've got the Babel real-time transpilation process, so you can actually do it in the browser as well. But then obviously when you actually release and do a proper, proper bundle everything up to distribute it, that's obviously when it'll transpile it, and then you're only overloading the ES5 code in the browser. But I think when you're actually developing your modules or the app that you're using JSPM with, I think you can do it in real time on the fly as well. I could be wrong, but I think that's what I had set up at one point.
And something like that would be more for just development, right? Like actually having it done straight in the browser. Because I know you can do stuff like that with like even like JSX has something where you can play around with things in the browser, and it's just slower. All right, cool. I was curious about that, and I think it's things like that where it's even makes more sense that if you're using one, it does make sense to use the other because they do play so nicely together. So I know for me, one of the more confusing bits that I've run into is the actual configuration setup for System.js. And if you are using JSPM, and this was the first time I was using it, and I was just like, holy crap, that's awesome, is that when if you're using JSPM and System.js, when you say JSPM init, it creates that config for you. And then you just have to load it in, and you don't have to worry about exactly how you're setting up your maps and your bundles and things like that. It does all of that stuff for you, which is which I think is really nice, because that's one thing that I still run into every once in a while because so the Angular 2 Quick Start Guide is where I first started messing around with any of this stuff, and they have the system config, but then they still have inline script tags where it's pulling in the files specifically. So I guess that would be one of my other questions. So if you think of it in like 3 parts, you can pull, maybe not 3 parts. I might be doing a terrible job at trying to explain what I'm trying to explain. But so you can so even if in your config you have your maps set up, there's a property you can configure called maps where you can say jQuery points to this file location. But at that point when that map is set up, has jQuery been loaded into the browser yet, or is it not loaded in until in a file somewhere you say import $ from jQuery? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's the whole piece of that's where System.js comes into play, and that's where you get the dynamic loading. And so it wouldn't get loaded until you are executing a file that requires it, that is actually explicitly declared.
Okay, all right. Because that's something else that I became confused with, partially with, I think, when I was messing with RX stuff.
Okay.
I got confused with the different, and so I'm actually just going to share this because I'm assuming somebody else has run into this problem as well. So in Angular 2, the HTTP module returns an observable. It returns a very, very stripped down observable that does not have all of the operators on it that you would originally think. So for example, right out of the box, at least in its current situation, you say, http.get something, and then you can say .subscribe or whatever just fine. You try to say .map. It will show up if you have it in TypeScript. You have it typed, so it's pulling in. And it's like, okay, I know that an observable has a method called map, but then when you run it in the browser, it doesn't work because it doesn't because it doesn't have that one operator on it. What you do then is you can then import just a strict import, no curly bracket syntax, anything. You just say import and then the path to the exact operator you want, and then you can pull them in one at a time. I know that's not specifically related to what we're doing, but it was using System.js with Angular 2, and it was something where it took me forever to find out exactly why that was happening, and that's what prompted my question just now of when is something loaded into the browser. But yeah, so hopefully that helps. Hopefully that helps somebody out, because I spent way longer than I should have trying to figure out why map was not working on my HTTP observable.
Yeah, I actually think that's pretty cool that Angular is that they force that type of strictness. I think that's great that they're kind of forcing you to be lean. That's pretty neat. I know with React, an example of that is that you can import React, or you can import React and the methods that you need and nothing else, and and I know it's better practice to just import what you need as opposed to the entire library.
Yeah, well, and I actually think Angular 2 is going a step further now, because they're in release candidate as of yesterday, I think. candidate for Angular 2. Or this morning, something started popping up on my newsfeed today saying something about Angular 2 release candidate. But I know that the way they're distributing the libraries is even, I think, going to be even more modular than it is now, like to the point where you'll actually have to npm or JSPM install
certain
specific,
feature.
so like you'll have to specifically include Angular 2 core and Angular 2 platform, I think. So that's based off of the 5 minutes of reading I did this morning, looking at the change log. But now I'm just getting off. Now I'm just getting wildly off topic. For in general with System.js and JSPM. One thing.
Sorry, just
no, go ahead.
Briefly on the, you mentioned config earlier about how JSPM helps with a lot of the configuration of this kind of stuff. Because I think if somebody wants to get into writing ES 2015 or ES Next code, I think it's quite mind-boggling at first, unless you're using one of these bigger monolithic frameworks that kind of hold your hand a little bit. So many steps to configure. You've got to configure the framework, the transpilers, the packages, and all this kind of stuff. It's so confusing, and it's quite a lot of friction there for new developers to kind of get into it. So if JSPM is kind of holding your hand a little bit more, and it can sets up the transpiler for you, sets up the module and the bundler and all those other kind of things, it kind of does it all for you. I think it's going to be a lot easier for people to start writing the next version of JavaScript a lot sooner. So I think that's quite exciting as well. So it'd be great to see more people using this and showing examples using JSPM to kind of abstract some of that complexity out.
Yeah, I can totally agree, Leon. And I think I would add to that a little bit more is that I think for folks like me who've maybe been with the project, for a while, it doesn't feel like I'm getting a lot for free because I'm kind of like I'm riding the wave and the wave just got higher. So I think for folks coming into into the community now, I think they're kind of reaping a ton of really great benefits that really weren't even there with the earlier versions. So yeah.
Cool. Sounds
And
good.
You're pretty active on the Gitter for JSPM from what you had said, right? So that helps a lot with the community. Like Aurelia, I go on every so often, and their Gitter community is pretty awesome. And and Slack for Polymer the same way.
Yeah, I wish everybody would just get on one thing, whether it's Gitter, Discourse, or Slack. It's kind of like a chat maintenance nightmare, and then HipChat, and then Skype. It's like we always have like 5 chat clients. Maybe that's the next unicorn, is the person who combines all of them to like one.
I don't know. That actually kind of sounds terrifying. I don't know if I want it.
We talked a little bit about compilation. I dropped off for a little bit, some network issues here. So maybe if we talked about this already, we could just ignore this. But like when you compile to like a bundle.js or whatever you're going to do, one JavaScript file basically where all of your imports compile to into a single file, or if you're using Steel.js, it's a couple of files maybe. But when you have that, is there advantages to right now, having that large file is fine unless you're on mobile, right? But ultimately, how these load may be different, and I wonder if HTTP2, if we're going to be, are there going to be tools to get around this, basically, until H2 is viable?
I have a short, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I actually wanted to have a little trajectory into bundling, because bundling actually is a little bit of an anti-pattern when it comes to what we're going to hopefully be getting from HTTP2, right? We don't need to bundle because we should be able to just actually rely on HTTP2 to load in things as we need, and we don't need to bundle. But that said, I think the verdict is still out, as if bundling might even be faster compared to using HTTP2's dynamic loading, but I think the question on that is I don't know, it's just a little bit still out. I don't know.
Cool. One of the things too I was curious about. I know like one of the things about Tracer when I was using that for like getting I guess different syntax into the browser, like we're doing with these modules, is there is this runtime, and Babel has something similar too. I'm not quite sure how these get used, because Babel I just used for the transpilation, just to create this file. But there's, Tracer has this runtime, and I've seen like a Babel runtime as well. Is there performance concerns with any of that stuff with using
Yes.
System?
Yeah, that's actually, I haven't used that because, again, I have the same kind of setup as you, but I think the Leon mentioned that. I mean, I've seen the option, and I think that's where it's transpiling in the browser dynamically.
Yes.
In terms of
exactly
performance, I mean, I wouldn't recommend doing that for production, right? I mean, for production,
Yeah.
I think you definitely want to make sure it's transpiled and bundled, and that's what happens when it's productionized. But
yeah, if you read the
for local
Babel
development, that's
docs,
not bad.
it specifically says, not to be used in production and stuff. But really, it's for development. It means that you can quickly make changes to all your modules and things, or your app, whatever you're doing, and it'll, just reload the browser and transpile it in the browser instead of you having to wait for the full bundling process to be completed. So really useful for development, but as you said, you really wouldn't want to use it for production.
Awesome. Good safety tips.
Yeah, and there is also a lot of concerns with JSPM, in terms of local development, how it was a lot slower than Webpack, for instance, and also JSPM didn't natively have support for hot module loading. It does now. There were plugins before, a little not always the most reliable. They were working and then not working with newer versions, and so it has that built in natively now as a core feature, which is great. But a lot of people who are used to Webpack were like, "Oh, this is so slow when I'm developing locally. All these files are loading one by one, and it's not bundled." But the newer version does allow you to bundle for local development. So if that's what you want, you can do it.
Yeah, and just to clarify, and you may have said this earlier because I know I asked, but the hot reloading is something I know the React community is big on. But we have it's like live reload browser, right? But for the modules, right? So it transpiles and then compiles that new file. Is that correct?
Correct, and the most important thing is that it doesn't change the context of where you are. And so if you have a drop-down open and you make a change to the name of the drop-down, when it reloads, the drop-down is still open, right? So it's live reload plus.
So it maintains the state of your application, I think, is a way that I've heard it explained to me as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I know stuff with can do a lot of this stuff as well, where you'll make a change to your SAS code or something like that, and then you just see the style change. Nothing else changes on the screen. There isn't a full refresh. So it's like that, but specifically for these modules, which is awesome because
That is really cool.
It's a really helpful development tool. Does something like hot module loading, is it just for development? The only reason I'm going off topic again, but the reason is because I just had a conversation with somebody about this, where say you have some kind of long-running application, so something that just stays open, and then an update is pushed that doesn't change everything. Say like one component is updated. Is there a way to use this like hot module stuff in more of a production sense, or is it mostly just for development? Again, totally off topic. So, but I'm just curious if any of you guys had thoughts on that.
Well, I think that's web workers come into play, but also I think with module loading, I mean, you turn it on and off. So if you want to have it on during your production mode, then go for it. Like you're driving. But I think web workers are really more better tools for the thing that you're trying to do. It's like, hey, my user's got this open. Let me go fetch some data. Let me go check his email. Let me come back.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm thinking like the type of use case I'm thinking of is, so say you have a I don't know, a news feed or something like that, and then to the right of it you have like the details. So newsfeed, you click on something and there's details, like the default anything application, right? And you don't require just part of it is different. And so like one part of the details is different. Like you've added, so like there's an action menu and you've added multiple actions to it. If there's a way to push just that one part to production, or if it's better off just let the person refresh and do it. Like I said, I have no idea. I'm literally just spouting nonsense at this point. It sounds like it would be interesting.
I think it should be your next project.
I've seen a partial solution to that, though.
Yeah.
So, like if you were to combine something like the hot reloading with Steel.js, have you guys seen this?
Well, Steel.js is like the grandchild of System.js. I don't know if I mentioned that, but it's okay.
No, I don't think you did mention it, but yeah, it's an interesting project. It's not as popular as System. It's not as big, but I thought it was cool because they have this, and maybe System does this, and I just don't know it. But they had a way where it analyzes your imports and then compiles loader files based on where those are actually connected. So, like, you could have, if you have jQuery, let's say, on 10 pages, and you have something else on 5 pages, it'll try and optimize your bundles so you get a few bundles that are common that you would have, and then you would have one. It wouldn't be one bundle, so it's sort of like a half. Like it's not fully like this is your loader file. If this file parses, it's like it optimizes for smaller files, but not quite to the point of like H2 would.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
I think Angular Universal can do that too, or it can parse through.
Yeah. Sorry, Eric. Don't mean to. No. Good. There's a lot of interesting things happening right now. I mean, there's always interesting things happening, but a lot of this stuff I think is particularly interesting. But we've got about 10 minutes left or so. Something I wanted to make sure that we got to at least just a touch on is module loaders in general are not simple. They Leon, I think, mentioned this earlier. When we were talking about configuration, there's just so much that you have to wrap your head around. We've been talking about how great System.js is and JSPM. If there's one not pitfall, is there one thing that while you were learning that you had a hard time figuring out, or the thing that took you the longest to wrap your head around that maybe maybe you could share, and anybody else that's having the same problems could help them out?
Should I go first?
Yeah.
Okay. For me, honestly, it was the problem that I had most recently, where I was on JSPM 0.16 and I was trying to bundle this and put it into something that was an AMD dependency injection manager like Require.js, and so and that was really, really painful. And then when I found the docs for beta, I was like, oh wait, I can do this the right way. And so I think that was the hardest part for me, probably.
It sounds like the beta version solves many problems.
Solves like all of the problems. It's like the solution to the internet pains that plague us. So
brilliant. I'd like to really know if you were starting again, kind of what kind of reading, or what kind of, is there any books? Is there any good articles? Is there anything that we can stick in the show notes so people can really kind of get a head start on learning about all this kind of different stuff? I'd certainly like to learn more, that's for sure.
The beta docs.
They're that good.
I would say
cool.
the beta docs, and then also Guy did a really good talk on Angular Air that I thought was pretty good. It's a little bit like, it's a little technical. It can get like almost a little too technical at times, but I would say stick with it. It's pretty good. Just because if you're not into web standards and specs, then you might like so, But
okay.
If you are, then it's a talk for you. But it's a pretty good talk. And honestly, the docs are great. I would say Gitter is another good place to ask questions.
Ace, sounds really good. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, I mean, we're getting really close. Does anybody have anything else they want to share? Anything they want to plug? Anything random they want to spout off about, just in general?
Oh, thank you, JavaScript, for getting simpler. Less magic, more standards. It feels like we're coming together a little bit. It's good.
Absolutely.
They're working on it. Let's not say it's simple yet. They're working on it.
I was going to say there's some contention with some groups there.
No.
Well, for me, I adopted React, right, and it's very much a functional library, and it takes away a lot of magic, and so that coupled with JSPM and System.js, it just feels like kind of going back to basics, but it feels good. So
nice. So if people want to learn more about you or find you, what's your Twitter handle, and where's a good place to start looking?
Sure. I will be at Google I/O this year. I'm really excited about that. I am really horrible about Twitter, but I will. You can find me at Nomad Techie, NOMAD and Techie, and yeah.
Fantastic.
All right. I think that's a wrap for episode 87, JSPM and System.js. Thank you, Amal, for coming. Thank you, Leon, for joining the panel. Thank you, Danny. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. Bye,
Cool,
everybody.
thank you.